Our minds are so powerful that what we focus on reverberates through every aspect of our lives. So why not see what happens when we put our attention on all the good things people are doing? Join me for the good with Teresa G as we start a ripple effect by focusing on all the greatness in the world. Tony Brown is an architect and educator who has dedicated the past 40 years to working in transform education, teaching how design can preserve the natural world. As the founder of Ecosa Institute, he has designed a cutting-edge interdisciplinary curriculum that connects design and ecology to address the many environmental challenges we face. Hi, Tony. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, Teresa. It's good to hear you.
It's good to hear you too. Just to let everyone know, I am an Ecosa alumni, and so you'll be picking up on that through our conversation here because Ecosa affected me very deeply and was a catalyst for a lot of the things I do today. And one thing I just have to say is that many people might not know this about Tony, but he has a very hands-on approach at Ecosa and still accompanies students on quite a few of the field trips. And a lot of the field trips, we camp. And I'm not talking RV camping, I'm talking, tent camping. And he actually will tent camp with us. And I find that absolutely inspirational because what are you, like 80 now, Tony?
Yep. I'm not still,
and you're still camping?
Not so much. I did last year, but not this year.
I just think that's inspirational because, there's a lot of people that stop camping at like 30, 40, and here you are still going out there and I'm just, it says a lot to how strong your body is and your mind. And I just think that's really cool. I had to tell you that.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah. So one of the things you say, Tony, is that in a move towards a more sustainable architecture, that you believe we must also examine what sustains us as individuals and as cultures. We must remember to sustain ourselves spiritually and the ultimate goal of the aesthetic. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, well, one of the things that really disturbed me about design and architecture was that we tend to be blinded into a focus on just one thing, which is the aesthetic of the building and how it functions in reality. Architects very rarely take into account how their buildings affect people. And buildings, of course, affect us very profoundly because we are biology and we actually evolved by interacting with the natural environment. And that shaped us to be what we were. Well, now we live pretty much in totally artificial environments. And so those are affecting us, but we really don't have a lot of ideas of how they are affecting us. And so my idea was that we need to look at architecture from a way it functions at the emotional and spiritual level for human beings to live in them. We create these office buildings with sort of fluorescent lights and no windows, and does that have any effect on the way we are? I would say it probably does, and it's probably not all positive. So just trying to expand the area that we use to determine whether architecture is good or bad or indifferent. And unfortunately, most of our architecture is indifferent, but some of it is pretty bad. And what?
Yeah, because when you start, when I always tell people your house or your office is like your second skin because it affects you that deeply because you're spending most of your time, especially us up north, we're spending most of our time in those spaces. So it's just, or even your third skin if you want to count clothing. But after that, that has a huge overall effect on your well-being. the
absolutely.
spaces where you're staying.
Yeah, things like lighting, views, temperature, all of those things affect how we respond to a particular environment. And one of the things that really got me interested in this whole field was that we actually don't, as architects, look at ourselves in context. We sometimes look at ourselves as part of a neighborhood, maybe, but generally we look at individual buildings and we design them as individual buildings with not much connection to the existing culture or the existing neighborhood or, human interactions, and how do they actually improve human interactions, instead of separating us out as a culture.
When did you recognize that? When did you recognize that we were designing more of a separate entity, each building, each place?
Well, generally, it was during my time at Arcosanti, which is Paolo Soleri's design for a three-dimensional city. And, I began to see that we segregate everything. We segregate our society by age, by income levels, by creating walled-in developments that separate us from society at large. And there's a lot of retirement buildings, like there's tons in Prescott because it's an older population. And those are like ghettos of older people who never interact with children or teenagers or anyone other than people their own age. And to me, that's kind of a deadening process because you don't stay current with the world. You become this hermit in these retirement communities.
And Prescott does have a lot of those because when I was looking for a house there, when I was there, a lot of the places were said, 65 and up only. Like, wow, I've never seen that before.
Crazy. It's my version of hell is to have to live in those places.
I guess, yeah. So you also say that we're a society that busily band-aids symptoms rather than sorting out causes.
Yeah. For example, you can use roads as an example. What we do is we build a road and then it gets congested. So instead of figuring out why is it congested and how could we change that, what we do is we just add another lane onto the road. And that attracts more traffic, so it's a Band-Aid solution for a very short time. So then it gets congested again. What do? We add another lane. Instead of looking at, well, maybe it would be good to zone housing developments so they're actually very near to workplaces like office spaces and commercial spaces. But what we tend to do is, again, we separate everything out. We have commercial areas and we have housing areas and we have entertainment areas, and those are all separate, so we have to drive because that's the way the structure of our cities is laid out. We can't walk out of our door, walk 3 or 4 blocks and go to work. We have to drive sometimes an hour, sometimes an hour and a half just to get to where the jobs are. And part of that's because of zoning. Zoning has been one of the forces that's really segregated us from a more rich kind of environment. When you live in a dense city, for example, you can leave your home, walk half a block, have a coffee, then maybe get on a subway and get to work in about 5 or 10 minutes. And to me, that is a perfect way to be living, instead of getting in a car to go to the coffee shop and then getting in your car to go to work and then getting in your car to go drop off your kids and then get in a car to take them to ballet lessons. We spend so much time traveling. And one of the things we don't ask, for example, we don't really ask the right questions to get the right solutions. For example, we look at how can we make it quicker and more convenient for cars to get from place to place. Well, the real question is, how do we provide access? And access is not necessarily cars. Access could be walking, and that means you restructure your town or city so that it encourages walking or biking, and it's shorter distances between where you live and where you work and where you're entertained and so on. So mixed-use development really begins to look at that as a solution, which is a much deeper approach than just looking at a symptom and saying, okay, we'll fix the symptom.
You know, I'll never forget when I landed in Amsterdam, and I couldn't quite figure it out. I was sitting in a cafe outside, and I could not figure it out for a while what was odd or weird about what was going on. And then I realized that it was absolutely almost quiet and still, because there's very little car use in Amsterdam. It's all bikes. So all you hear is the occasional ring of the bell. And I finally realized, I'm like, oh my gosh, there's some sort of like form of serenity over this whole city, because there's not the beeping and the loud rumbling of engines. And that changed me. That was such a huge realization for me when I realized what I was missing. I was missing the loudness.
That noise is also a stressor. So again, it's like, from an environmental point of view, having this constant noise in your background is also a way of creating tension in people. So a calm, quiet environment is really a way of reducing that stress that people have. I
agree. And I wanted to ask you, part of the Ecosa curriculum is to send the students out with Cody London, where they go out in nature with only a wool blanket and some water bottles and survive. Cody teaches them how to survive for about 3 days. Oh. And I wanted to, my idea when I came back to class after that experience, you asked us, how do you feel? And what was really huge to me is that when I entered city limits, I could feel this sort of slight overstimulation going on and within me after being out and completely in nature for 3 days. And that was really a big thing for me, because I realized that our society in general is very overstimulating. And I was wondering if that is why did you incorporate that experience into the curriculum? Was it to help us realize things like that, or?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's one of the things to show the contrast, but it's also an intent of saying we talk about being sustainable all the time, and everybody's sustainable now these days, but we never address what sustainable means. Does it mean we're sustaining an American lifestyle for everybody on the planet? Are we sustaining a homeless person's lifestyle for everybody on the planet? So this is an idea of, if you want to know what real sustainability is, you just have to go out with you and nature, and not all these filters that we put between us. Because even when we go camping, we take all this tech stuff. We have lanterns and stoves and folding chairs and everything else that we carry when we go out into nature. So this experience is really exposing you to that idea that only nature is truly sustainable, and we as a species used to be part of that sustainable system. And then we separated ourselves from it, mostly from the time we started doing agriculture. And the other thing is, when you're on that trip, you have very limited amounts of food. And so it's interesting because most of our students have never really suffered hunger. And we've had lots of feedback from students saying it was uncomfortable, but it was really kind of a revelation that, that supermarket abundance is not real when you actually get to a truly sustainable position. And also, it's a very strong bonding experience for all the students that come to the Institute.
It really is. It's absolutely a great way to start building that tribe right away off the bat.
Yep.
So that goes back to the whole idea that you and the Ecosa curriculum is constantly reminding us that using nature as a model in design can solve a lot of our current problems.
Right. Yeah, and one of the things that we forget about is that everything is connected. And in nature, everything is connected. If you're in a forest, actually the roots of the trees are actually connected to each other by microcausa. And trees actually speak to each other. And so there's a real network within an ecosystem that works as a whole. In other words, it's not some tree in the forest that's saying, okay, now I'm the chief tree. I'm going to give you so much water and I'm going to give you so much nutrients and I'm going to take this much for myself. It's actually a continual ongoing negotiation between all the species that make up an ecosystem. And we've forgotten that complexity because we as humans often have a really hard time with complex ideas. We like to split everything down into single subjects, mostly because Descartes was the philosopher who pushed that approach. And it's really that we have to reintegrate our thinking to match that way that nature works. And biomimicry is, to a certain extent, working in that direction, looking at nature and saying, well, how did nature do that? Because it really seems to work. And one of the things that comes out of that is that form, the actual morphology of a design in nature is a lot of what its benefits are in terms of how it functions. But I'd like to go way deeper and say it's not only about the things in nature, it's about the process in nature. How does nature process information? We have the internet now, and it's sort of really free for all, and of course it's beginning to be controlled more and more by a few major companies. And of course nature is not controlled by any one single group of, you could argue that a little bit, not actually controlled by one organism. The only one organism that controls everything is us. And we need to be a little more humble in terms of nature's been doing this for billions of years, and we should actually pay attention and look at the models that nature has evolved and say, can't we begin to evolve into the similar way? So it's imagining in a political system or an economic system or a social system, how do we make it more complex, not simpler? Because we've been really good at simplifying things and we need to get better at complexifying things.
And, we try so hard to control it all, but it's really becoming quite obvious that we have not as much control as we think as we deal with all these natural disasters. This summer was like a huge time for natural disasters all over the world at one time. And I think it had people start thinking, why is this happening? And I think that it was definitely an opportunity to start thinking about the complexity of our planet and what our role is.
Yeah, and the irony really is, we've been talking about climate change for like 50 years and more, and we really haven't ever really addressed the problem correctly. We put it off because we just don't want to believe that things could possibly get that bad. So we had opportunities for the last 60 years or more to actually begin to address this problem. Well, now we're going to have to address it in a much more aggressive way, because nature is about to whack us across the head, and we need to really begin to look at systems and how can we begin to work with nature instead of against nature. And I think that's one of the keys, that we tend to separate ourselves from nature instead of allowing nature to thrive with us, instead of using all the land area for our own uses.
Right. And, I mean, ever since I went to Ecosa, I look at the world completely differently, and how we, when there's flooding in Houston, I'm like, oh, if only we had some help there to manage their water, because it's all just pavement. So there's no absorption. There's nowhere for the water to get sponged up with. And it's just a great approach that Ecosa has with just transforming the way students look at the world. And I want you to sort of talk about what inspired you to start Ecosa, and what is Ecosa's mission?
Oh, okay. Well, actually, it was started through frustration. I, as an architect, I went to architecture school in the 50s, and I sort of realized, around 2000, that architecture schools are still training architects in the same way I was trained. And, we're going into the 21st century here. And we don't have a new way of teaching architecture. So I started thinking about, what do we need to do to create that? So I actually started teaching at Prescott College, and actually for 2 or 3 semesters, and we got to a point where we had 5 classes going, all from the shape of the city to nature and humans and so on. But then there was a financial issue, and so they actually closed down that whole program, and that was in late 1980s. So they were way ahead if they'd have kept it going. But so anyway, it was a trigger. So I thought, well, screw it, I'll make my own school.
Good for you,
I had no idea what I was doing,
making an opportunity out of it.
Yeah, it was like. I did it, and eventually we put something out on the internet, and we got our first 14 students in 2000. So it was my frustration with, and also it took like almost 2 years to get Prescott College to say yes to the program, because things in big organizations that are hierarchical structures tend to move really, really slowly.
They do.
And because we're small, we can be pretty nimble. We can change the curriculum. We can use different faculty. We can do all sorts of innovative stuff, because we don't have to go through a curriculum committee and
all the red tape.
Yeah, and the administration, red tape. So it's a very freeing thing to be able to do it this way. And it's really been a fantastic experience, and the students that come through here are just wonderful. I remember most of them, and I certainly remember you, Teresa.
Well, I don't let you forget me, do I?
Yeah, right. So it's very, for me, it's actually one of the things that I like doing, being my age. It's really, it keeps me young. And I tell the students, I'm a vampire. I'm going to suck your energy out. Keep going.
You definitely challenge the students to look. It's a challenging situation, because for someone like me who is coming out of being in what was very similar to corporate America. It's very challenging because all of a sudden it's working together, looking out for each other, community, and it's very different from the way the world is working.
Yep.
But it's a very healing and enlightening experience overall because it takes you back to your roots, to our roots. I feel.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear it.
As peoples. So, and I have to tell you, I told my mom I was interviewing you, and she got all excited because not only did me going to Ecosa change my life and my family's life, but even my parents' life. When we started learning about permaculture, I remember calling my mom and dad and just talking for hours on end about permaculture. And they loved the idea so much. It inspired them to basically tear up. They live in a suburb, and they tore up their whole yard. And now it's this huge urban farm. I'll have to send you pictures. And I mean, because they actually, my property is going at such a slow speed compared to what they have done. And it's just so impressive. And now, you go there and you're basically just eating out of their yard. I would say about 8 months. They live in a cold climate, but I would say about 8 months out of the year, they have everything you need to eat right there in their little I think it's like a half acre. And it's, so my mom said, reminded me to tell you that not only did you affect my life and everyone I work with, but my parents really became very passionate about permaculture, which is fabulous.
Yeah, good on your parents. That's great.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I said, send me pictures of their garden. I'd love to see it.
I will. When I go next, I'll get some pictures. Let's see. So I wanted to talk to you about community. Ecosa curriculum fosters a community feeling like I've never experienced before. And it was such a transformational experience to be a part of that community. Can you talk a bit about why fostering community is so important in redesigning our world?
Sure. For me, community is the only real security that we have. And that used to be a given, when we were a small agrarian village. And what we've done is we've really handed over so many of the things that make us secure to organizations. Like, instead of children taking care of parents or helping other people out with building houses or doing those kind of things that we always used to do, now Social Security and Medicare take care of parents when they're sick. Hospitals and hospice and these retirement homes, assisted living homes have really replaced community, and not in a particularly good way. And it's because we're really isolated and separated that those kind of things that used to be normal, where an extended family would be taking care of each other, we've really become individually isolated, and we have to rely on these big social systems administered by somebody outside the community to actually take care of us. So for me, being part of a community is really being able to call on resources when you really need them. And obviously, people can't just give up their jobs to look after parents, but it's one of those things that our societies are starting to move towards. For example, there's now moves to get more leave to look after parents or a spouse that's experiencing problems. So really, having to be part of a community is a commitment. And I was just saying yesterday that People often come to Prescott looking for a community like it's a commodity that you actually go out and find. But actually, community is a building process that we need to work together to build a community. You have to, in a way, be embedded in one place for a fair amount of years so that you begin to know everybody and know the neighborhood and the community and the climate and all those things. So for me, it's really important that we understand how to begin to create that community. And like you were saying earlier, it's really part of that Cody trip where it's take care of each other, because taking care of each other is really, really important. So instead of handing off that care to an organization or a government agency, it's really important to begin thinking, how can we as a society start taking care of each other instead of abdicating that kind of responsibility?
I remember something that just blew my mind. We were going on a field trip, and at the time I was vegan. And where I come from, if you're vegan and you go to an event or something, you just don't eat because everyone's like, "What? You're vegan? I'm sorry, but we eat meat." Mm-hmm. And so I remember we're going on a field trip, and someone says to me, I said, "Well, I'll just bring my own stuff." And someone says, "No, if one of us is vegan, we're all vegan. And we'll all cook vegan and we'll eat vegan." And it just, not only did it just warm my heart, but it just made me feel like I belonged instead of this outsider because I chose different food choices. Yep. And it was just I think about it all the time now because it immediately connected us all. And it was like, it doesn't matter if one is suffering, we all suffer. If one is doing good, we all are doing good. And we've really, as a society, leaving Ecosa, moving back into society, I thought, wow, Tony is genius in the way that he implements that fostering of community, because it's really not easy to find anymore, Right.
No, I know. Yeah, that's a kind of tragedy of our society is now we look at communities online, my Facebook community and my Twitter community.
Well, that's sad.
Yeah, very sad, because we've lost the real community, and so we're replacing it with these online. We call them communities, but they're not. I don't think they're really communities. I mean, they connect people, they connect friends, but it's not like you're physically present. So if somebody needs something, you can immediately jump in and try and give them what they need in terms of care or in terms of whatever.
And science is catching up with this because research is now suggesting for people to live a healthy life, they're suggesting that people actually spend time and socialize with other people around 5 hours a day, and not just work. It's like socializing, community. And so that was really interesting to me. So that's actually creates a healthier human, a healthier mind and body and soul.
Right. And I think health is actually a really important issue because, we look at the health of humans, but we need to look at the health of nature as well. And actually, if you look at health as a measure of how sustainable we are, we're really not doing a very good job. And if you look at what makes people healthy, it is not being stressed out. That's a big factor in terms of disease. And yet our whole society and work environment often is full of stress. And then in terms of nature's health, it's been shown that we can actually, if we have a view out to nature, it actually reduces your heart rate. It makes you feel calmer. And it's important psychologically to have a connection with nature. And if we could only begin to stop being afraid of nature, because we really are afraid of nature, we want to get rid of it. We like to control the plants in our parks and our gardens. So it's really being willing to accept that nature is messy. If you just let your garden go wild, it gets very messy, and us humans don't like messy things. And so if we can learn to live with nature, nature will make us healthier, and we can make nature healthier by providing more habitat space for all the other species on the planet.
Yes. Yes. And then at Ecosa, you and all the faculty teach the students to design with the goal of creating an ecologically harmonious society. What does that look like to you?
That's a big subject.
Yes, that is. Just tell me what that looks like so people can understand what that.
Well, I think one of the things that we want to do is to get rid of the barriers to this idea of community. In the old days, in places like New York, there was immigrants living next to millionaires, and the garbage collector living next to very rich people. Now, what we've done is we've separated this out, so we no longer see people that aren't in our own group as real people. So it's very hard to care for what you don't see. And it's very easy to then get rid of any sense of responsibility for those people. So trying to look at how do we change the way we design neighborhoods, cities, and towns. And one of the things that I think would be really important is to bring back the idea of a multi-species environment. In other words, we only really create environments for ourselves, and nature gets pretty short shrift in terms of we push nature away, we bulldoze, we clear the area, we pave it over. So one of the things I would see as doing that is to have nature coexist with us. And the other thing would be to have mixed-use development instead of zoning things so we separate out all the functions of a society. I think we need to zone everything for mixed use. If you're going to build a housing development, you have to build in office space, you have to build in commercial space, you have to build in corner stores, for example, which have disappeared. They used to be the thing that people would walk to get something they forgot at the supermarket. So really, it's again this idea of recomplexifying our society, both physically and psychologically, so that neighbors, if you walk down a typical suburban street, generally all you see is garage doors. It used to be that you'd see people sitting out on their porch and you'd say, "Hi, how are you doing?" And or you'd see them out in their garden doing something. And there used to be places that were communal places where people would meet. And that's really gone the way of all other things that were positive. So I think making sure that we really understand that separation is really not conducive to a real society.
And it seems that the U.S. has gone more this way, because when I was touring through Europe, it seemed like there was a lot more of socializing out on the streets and spots and cafes outside. And I remember coming back to the U.S. and sort of looking for that.
Yeah, exactly. It's like there's not a real public realm anymore. For example, we have a big square in our town with trees.
Yes, I love that square.
Yeah, it's great. And, there's events there. But the irony is, if you want to protest anything, you have to ask the people you're protesting against if you can protest. And
Yes.
it's kind
Oh.
of nutty because, public gatherings, we just did the Women's March, and, that they had been negotiating with the city for, I think, 2 months, and they couldn't get the city to agree to let them have amplification so people could give speeches. And to me, that's what? Isn't that something to do with the Constitution, that you have the right to assemble? And so the Women's March was great. It was really big, but there was nobody, getting the crowd excited or talking about the issues or anything. So to me, that's that part of that controlling thing that seems to be more and more part of what our government and society wants to do, is to control everything that we do, especially if it involves protesting. It used to be that we would protest out in the streets, but now they put up protest zones that are far enough away from the event that's happening that they're not going to have much impact.
Yeah, and that's been part of our society, is that we could voice our concerns as groups and do it wherever we wanted, whenever we wanted,
Yeah, absolutely. It's part of my radical background, I guess. I actually didn't get radicalized until I came to the States in '68. Of course, there was the Vietnam War and protests. And
that was a very radical time in general.
Yeah, so I got really radicalized. And although, radical is good. Radical means root. So you go back to the root of things and look at, is this what we really want? And I think one of the other problems I see is that we don't have a vision for our society. There's not really a leadership that's saying, here's the vision of what our planet could be like, or what our society could be like, or what our country could be like. We just talk about economics all the time, which is not really a vision. It just means make more money. And we really don't address things like homelessness and, the whole opioid problem. We just, we don't have a real idea of what would we like this country to look like in 10 years or 20 years. And I think that's really important, because if you don't set a visionary goal, how are you actually going to know how to begin to move towards it?
And I think there's a lot of opportunity in that, because, we all create vision. I mean, I do a vision board every year. And so, I definitely see the value and the importance in creating your future visions. But there's so much opportunity right now where our society is, and where design is at, and architecture. And I just want to talk to you about that, because these grassroots movements like Ecosa, and there's so many of them popping up all over. And there's quite a bit of opportunity in that. And you speak to that with your students about the opportunities of these times very often.
Yeah. Well, times of turmoil are often times of opportunity too. And so one of the things that I think that we are seeing is a gradual breaking down of our institutions. And I don't mean that in a sort of negative way, but it's looking at our economic situation. It's booming right now, but we're headed for another bust, and then there'll be another boom. So it's not really a sustainable system. So if we can begin to design alternatives that can replace these kind of systems that are breaking down, and often these systems are propped up by us, the taxpayers. They're not actually allowed to fail because they've become so huge and monolithic. But if we do have systems in place that can replace them, when they do really fail in a big way, we'll have things ready to take their place. It's always the big thing about revolution is it's great to tear things down, but you have to have something in place to replace them. And I think the same thing goes with politics, like we were talking about earlier. Community, a lot of community issues are political issues, just on a local scale. And we need to figure out ways of better dealing with that rather than the pyramid structure where there's a guy in charge, the mayor, who has the council, and then there's the staff, and then there's the people. And often the information only flows one way from the top down. And how can we make it bottom up so that we can actually have an impact as citizens on what happens? The internet was always promising all these great things, and it actually could still happen where we can actually vote on everything that's being discussed, so that there's a sense of what the community or the state or the nation wants. And actually, if you look at a lot of the polling, it's pretty interesting because Americans really all want the same thing. They want a job, they want some housing, they want to be happy, and they generally agree on how to get that to happen. But somehow our leadership becomes deaf to these voices, and the loudest voices tend to take control. And so we need to look at how can we set up a potentially new system that's efficient, but also has the ability to hear what people are really thinking and talking about.
I agree completely, because it does seem like there's common threads with all of us as Americans, that we're all looking for the same thing. And it's just overall well-being. And so being involved with these local grassroots efforts and I believe paying more attention to your local government is actually more helpful, because it's something that you can actively engage in with your fellow neighbors and your community, and that in itself creates some positive change.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
So I wanted to ask you, what have been some of your favorite student design projects over the years, just to give people some ideas?
Gosh, they're all pretty interesting. Well, actually, last semester we did a project with the Coalition for Compassion and Justice, which is trying to solve the homeless problem in town here. And our students did a whole study on the causes of homelessness, how that's being addressed all around the country, and then designing these tiny homes that would be available to people who are houseless. So that was kind of fun, and we're still working with that group to expand the information that we've got. Another one that was really a favorite of mine was taking a mall, and I think you guys were a part of that, taking a mall that was going to go defunct.
Oh yeah, the mall.
Yeah,
that was fun.
Yeah, they were having real problems filling the spaces, and so you all came up with a whole load of different strategies for actually making it a space that would be more attractive to more people hanging out and using the stores and so on. That was great.
Yeah, that was a great project, because we were taking a huge lot that was just empty, and we're bringing in, first of all sorts of gardens and edible food and outdoor community spaces, and then having apartments and offices and schools. So going back to that whole idea that you can walk to the grocery store and then walk to work in just, 5 minutes, and then pick up your kid from daycare all in a 5-minute walk. And that was just a really fun project.
Another project that was really interesting because it was a little different for us was actually a whole planning project that was initiated by I think the guy who worked for the Arizona Department of Transportation, who was their environmental specialist. And there's a plan to put a big collector road heading north, and it goes right through the middle of the antelope range here. So it will really impact them. And so he asked us to look at how could we work with this road and actually still maintain the habitat for the antelope. And so we came up with a whole plan of land swaps and how you could actually create a wildlife corridor and how it could go under the freeway or over the freeway. And then we looked at development, because this is a whole area where they want to develop. And so we came up with a plan that actually used compact housing, and we found that we could actually get as many houses in the same area as would be conventional development, but you could also have much more open space for the antelope. And one of the interesting finds was that any house that has a view on a natural area, you can add about $20,000 to the price of that house. So if you design the development so that every house has a view of where the antelope roam, I guess, you can actually add a value onto your house. So that was a really interesting thing, and actually it's still being touted, although the developers that are looking at this area are pretty much, no, I'm going to do the same old sprawling suburbia.
They are no longer going to do that?
No, they are going to do that.
Oh, they are going to do that. Bummer. Well,
Yeah.
that's pretty cool, though, that someone, that's showing some advancement, that we're looking at the animals and how we're going to affect them when building suburbia.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So that's pretty cool. So tell me, what is something that you do every day that helps you live your best life?
Well, I don't do it every day, but I go to the gym twice a week. That certainly helps. But generally, my life is so great because I'm sitting here looking out windows. I can see mountains. I can see granite boulders. The wind is blowing now, so the trees are all moving. And so for me, just being aware of my surroundings and enjoying it and not letting it become old hat, that's one of the things that I think makes my day really feel special. I feel really privileged to actually be here in this location. I've tried to minimize the amount of disturbance I did to the land. So for me, it's actually having this contact with nature that's an everyday experience, and that's really great. And the other nice thing, even though I have to use a car, it's only 8 minutes to the studio, so I really have no long commutes, which really helps a lot in terms of I have more time than people that have to commute an hour or two each way. And so that really makes my day feel better. I used to have coffee every day, and now I don't. Coffee really...
No more coffee?
I love coffee, but it was one of those things. I think that's about it. I just try and be aware of everything around me and enjoying it as much as I can. And of course, going to the studio every day and having the students there is just so energizing. It really makes my day feel like, I'm making progress of some kind.
And you are. And I really want to just applaud you, Tony, for designing a curriculum and program that helps students connect to themselves, to each other, the planet, and all life on Earth. And that drastically changes their approach to life and design. I just want to say thank you so much I know all of the Ecosa alumni join me in thanking you for that. So thank you.
Sure, you're more than welcome. It's an exchange, not a gift.
Yes.
So I get as much as I give. So,
well, thanks so much, Tony.
sure, you're welcome.
I'm Teresa Gabrielle, and you've been listening to The Good with Teresa G. You can follow The Good with Teresa G on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. If you haven't yet, go to the Apple Podcast and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. Join me next week for another inspiring conversation. Thank you for listening.